January 16th, 1992. Windsor, England. The soundstage at Bray Studios is small, intimate, and suffocatingly quiet. A few hundred people are gathered, sitting on risers, waiting. They are there to see a rock god, a living legend, the man whose graffiti once declared him God on the walls of Islington. They are there to see Eric Clapton. But the man who walks onto the stage does not look like a deity. He looks fragile. He is wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a simple jacket. There are no walls of Marshall amplifiers. There is no Gibson Les Paul screaming through a wah-wah pedal. There is only a chair and a nylon string acoustic guitar. He sits down. He looks at the floor, avoiding the eyes of the audience. He takes a breath that seems to shudder in his chest. And then he plays two harmonics, high, chiming notes that hang in the air like suspended tears. He begins to sing. The voice is not the blues roar of Crossroads or the desperate shout of Layla. It is a whisper. It is a question asked into the void. Would you know my name if I saw you in heaven? The audience does not cheer. They barely breathe because they know. Everyone in the room knows. Everyone watching later on television knows. They are not witnessing a performance. They are witnessing an autopsy of a living heart. They are watching a father try to communicate with a ghost. This song, Tears in Heaven, is not a pop hit. It is a tombstone. It is a suicide note that was rewritten at the last moment into a prayer for survival. To understand the weight of this moment, you cannot just listen to the melody. You have to understand the silence that preceded it. You have to understand that 10 months earlier, Eric Clapton's world didn't just break, it was atomized. This is the story of the worst day in the life of a rock star. It is the story of a high-rise window in New York City, a circus ticket left on a dresser, and the 4-year-old boy who saved his father's life twice, once by being born and once by dying. This is the ballad of a broken man and the song that forced the world to cry with him. To understand the magnitude of the tragedy, we must first understand the precarious nature of the man it struck. For the better part of 2 decades, Eric Clapton was a man running a race against death. He wasn't just a partier. He was a man consumed by addiction, a man who seemed to view survival as a personal failure. Throughout the 1970s, he was consumed by heroin, spending years as a recluse in his English mansion, surrounded by guitars he didn't play and people who enabled his habit. When he finally kicked that, he replaced it with a bottle. By the mid-1980s, Clapton was not just an alcoholic. He was a man disintegrating. He was volatile, unreliable, and physically wasting away. His liver was failing, his relationships were toxic, and his music, while still commercially viable, often lacked the fire of his youth. His career was a series of commercial highs and personal lows. He was a man who had everything, fame, fortune, talent, and yet seemed determined to burn it all down to the ash. He had relationships, but they were often chaotic. He had a marriage to Pattie Boyd, the muse for Layla, that had dissolved under the weight of his addiction, his infidelity, and his emotional unavailability. He was adrift, a legend living on past glories, hollowed out by his demons. And then, in 1986, a lifeline appeared. Her name was Lori Del Santo, an Italian actress. Their relationship was brief, passionate, and complicated, but it produced something that would fundamentally alter Clapton's chemistry. On August 21, 1986, Lori gave birth to a son. They named him Connor. For Clapton, the birth of Connor was not just a joyful event, it was a divine intervention. He looked at this child, and for the first time in his life, he saw a reason to exist outside of himself. He saw a responsibility that was greater than his addiction. He saw a future. In his autobiography, Clapton wrote about the first time he held the boy. He realized that he could not be the father this child needed if he was drunk. He realized that if he didn't stop, he would inadvertently pass his trauma, his chaos, down to this innocent life. He saw the cycle of abandonment that had defined his own childhood, raised by grandparents, rejected by his mother, and he vowed to break it. Connor became the catalyst. For the love of his son, Eric Clapton did the impossible. He checked into rehab. He fought the withdrawals. He faced the demons he had been drowning since he was a teenager. And he got sober. He stayed sober. By 1991, Eric Clapton was a new man. He was 4 years sober. He was clear-eyed. He was rebuilding his career, not as a burnt-out relic, but as a respected elder statesman of the blues, playing with a renewed passion and clarity. And the center of his universe was Connor. Connor was a golden-haired, energetic, bubbling source of joy. He looked remarkably like his father. Clapton was embracing fatherhood with a tentative, awestruck clumsiness. He wasn't a perfect father. He lived in England. Connor lived with Laurie in Italy. But he was trying. He was learning how to play, how to be present, how to love without condition. He was making up for lost time. In March of 1991, Clapton traveled to New York City. Laurie and Connor were there. Clapton had a break in his touring schedule, and he wanted to spend quality time with his son. He wanted to be a hands-on dad for the first time, without nannies or assistants. He took Connor to the circus, the Big Apple Circus in Lincoln Center. It was, by all accounts, a perfect night. It was the kind of night a father dreams of. Connor was mesmerized by the clowns, the elephants, the colors. Clapton watched his son, soaking in the boy's delight. For a man who had spent so many years in the gray fog of addiction, this was technicolor reality. It was pure happiness. It was the promise of a normal life. After the circus, he brought Connor back to the apartment where Laurie was staying. It was a high-rise on East 57th Street, the Galleria condominiums. He said goodnight to his son. He hugged him. He promised him that the next day they would go to the Bronx Zoo. They had a whole day planned, a father and son day. Clapton walked back to his hotel that night feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades. He was sober. He was working. He was a father. The demons were quiet. The future looked like a long, open road. He didn't know that the road was about to end. The morning of March 20th, 1991, broke bright and clear over Manhattan. It was a crisp, early spring day. In his hotel room, Eric Clapton woke up early. He was excited. He was going to pick up Connor and Laurie, and they were going to the Bronx Zoo. He was a father with a plan. He was dressed and ready to go. 40 blocks away, on the 53rd floor of the Galleria skyscraper, the morning routine was underway. The apartment belonged to a friend of Laurie's. It was a luxurious, glass-walled space, designed to offer breathtaking views of the skyline. But skyscrapers are not designed for 4-year-olds. That morning, a janitor was in the apartment, cleaning the windows. In a tragic, momentary lapse of protocol, a pane of glass, a window about 4 feet by 6 feet, had been left open to let in fresh air. It was a hole in the sky. It was a hazard that should not have existed. Connor was playing hide-and-seek with his nanny. He was full of energy, buzzing with the excitement of the circus the night before and the zoo trip to come. He was running. He ran into the room where the janitor was working. The nanny saw him. She saw the window. She shouted. But physics is faster than a warning. Connor ran past the janitor, onto the low ledge where the glass should have been, expecting the safety of the pain that was always there, and into the air. At his hotel, Eric Clapton's phone rang. It was Laurie. The voice on the other end was not intelligible at first. It was a scream, a primal, shattered sound. When he finally understood the words, they made no sense. "He's gone," she said. "He fell." Clapton's reaction was a protective mechanism of the brain. He entered a state of shock so profound it felt like calm. He couldn't process the information. "He fell?" he asked. "Is he okay?" He was imagining a fall from a chair, or maybe down a step. "No," she screamed. "He's dead." Clapton hung up the phone. He later described this moment as the world turning into slow motion. He put on his coat. He walked out of the hotel. He walked down the New York City street. He saw people rushing to work, cabs honking, the steam rising from the manholes. The world was continuing, indifferent and loud, while his universe had just ended. He felt like he was walking through a film set, detached from reality. He walked the 40 blocks to the Galleria. As he approached the building, he saw the flashing lights. He saw the ambulance. He saw the crowd gathering, the yellow tape. And in that moment, the denial shattered. The reality hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't a rock star. He was just a father walking toward the body of his son. The scene inside the apartment was a nightmare. The police, the paramedics, the grief. Clapton had to identify his son. He described looking at his beautiful boy, who looked like he was just sleeping, except for the terrible silence. He touched his face. He said goodbye. In the hours and days that followed, the music industry held its breath. Everyone who knew Eric Clapton, his management, his friends, his fellow musicians, had the same terrifying thought. They knew his history. They knew his demons. They believed, with a grim certainty, that this was the end. They expected him to drink. They expected him to use. They expected that the pain of this tragedy would trigger a relapse so severe it would kill him. It seemed inevitable. How could a man who had used heroin to cope with fame and alcohol to cope with loneliness possibly survive the death of his child sober? The funeral was held in Ripley, Surrey, at St. Mary Magdalene Church, the same church where Eric had worshipped as a boy. It was a cold, gray English day. The heavyweights of rock and roll, George Harrison, Phil Collins, were there, dressed in black, standing in silent support. The press was kept at a distance, but the weight of the grief was public. Connor was laid to rest, and Eric Clapton went back to his empty house. He was alone. The silence was deafening. The temptation to numb the pain, to reach for the bottle that had been his crutch for 20 years, was overwhelming. It was right there. Oblivion was an arm's reach away. He spent days staring at the walls, unable to move, unable to think, but something stopped him. In his autobiography, Clapton described a moment of clarity in the depths of his despair. He realized that if he drank, if he numbed himself, he would be betraying Connor. He had gotten sober for his son. To go back to the bottle now would be to make his son's life meaningless. It would be to say that the time they had together wasn't worth the pain he was feeling now. He realized that the only way to honor Connor's memory was to stay the course, to live the life his son had helped him find. He made a vow. He would not drink. He would feel every ounce of the agony. He would honor his son by surviving. But he needed a way to speak. He needed a way to get the poison out. He couldn't talk to anyone. The grief was too heavy for conversation. Words felt inadequate. So he went to the only place he had ever felt truly safe. He went to his guitar. He didn't plug into a Marshall stack. He couldn't bear the noise. The electric guitar felt too aggressive, too public. It was the instrument of the rock god, and the rock god was dead. Instead, he picked up a small, Spanish-style nylon string acoustic guitar. It was an ideal instrument he rarely played. The nylon strings were softer on the fingers. The tone was mellower, more intimate. It sounded like a whisper. It was an instrument made for solitude. He sat in his home, day after day, strumming simple chords. He wasn't trying to write a hit. He wasn't trying to write a song at all. He was just trying to breathe. He was using the vibrations of the wood against his chest to soothe the panic attacks that kept coming. He played just to keep his hands moving, to keep his mind from snapping. He began to hum. He began to ask questions to the empty room. Would you know my name? If I saw you in heaven? It was a theological question born of trauma. Clapton was asking, do I still belong to you? I am here in this fallen world, and you are there in peace. Are we still father and son? Have I been forgiven enough to join you? He wrote the first verse. It flowed out of him like a tear. Would it be the same if I saw you in heaven? He was grappling with the permanence of death, the fear that the bond had been severed. He was trying to imagine a future where they could meet again, a hope to hold on to in the darkness. But the song needed a bridge. It needed to move from the hypothetical question to the brutal reality of the present. He wrote the lines, "Time can bring you down, time can bend your knees." He was admitting his own frailty. He was admitting that he was crushed. He was acknowledging the sheer physical weight of grief, the way it brings you to your knees. Time can break your heart. Have you begging, please? And then, the resolution. Beyond the door, there's peace, I'm sure. It was a desperate grasp for faith. He had to believe there was peace, because the alternative was unbearable. He had to believe his son was safe. He wrote the line, "I must be strong and carry on," a mantra he was repeating to himself every hour of every day. He finished the song. He called it Tears in Heaven. He didn't play it for his manager. He didn't send it to his record label. He didn't think it was for public consumption. It was a private prayer, a therapeutic exercise. It was too personal, too painful to share. He put it on a cassette tape and left it in a drawer. It was a message to Connor, not to the charts. But the universe, or perhaps the industry, had other plans. Around this time, Clapton had been approached to write the score for a movie called Rush. It was a gritty drama about narcotics officers becoming addicted to the drugs they were policing. It was a dark film, and Clapton, with his own history of addiction, felt a connection to the material. He saw it as a way to work through his own past. He began writing the score. He needed a song for a specific scene, a moment of loss and reflection. He remembered the tape in the drawer. He played Tears in Heaven for the film's director, Lily Feeney Zanuck. Zanuck was stunned. She wept. She told him, "Eric, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. But it's not just for the movie. You have to release this. The world needs to hear this." Clapton was hesitant. Was he exploiting his tragedy? Was he selling his grief? But Zanuck convinced him that the song had a power that went beyond his own pain. She convinced him that by sharing it, he might help others who were grieving. She told him it was a gift. He agreed. But he wasn't ready to release it as a rock single. The context had to be right. That context arrived in the form of MTV Unplugged. In the early 90s, MTV was the cultural monolith. They had launched a series where hard-rocking bands played acoustic sets. It was usually a novelty, a chance to hear stripped-down versions of hits. When they approached Clapton, he saw it as the perfect vehicle. It matched the quiet, acoustic place he was in musically. It allowed him to play without the armor of electricity. The rehearsals were tense. Clapton was nervous. He hadn't played a full concert without a full band and electric volume in decades. He felt exposed, and he had decided to put Tears in Heaven on the set list. He also decided to rework Layla into an acoustic shuffle, stripping away its aggression. He was dismantling his own myth. On the night of the taping, January 16, 1992, the air in Bray Studios was electric with anticipation. The audience expected cocaine. They expected Layla. They expected the guitar hero. Instead, they got the man in the glasses with the nylon guitar. When he played Tears in Heaven, the room disappeared. It wasn't a concert anymore. It was a wake. You can see it in the footage. Clapton's eyes are closed for most of the song. He is not performing for the cameras. He is singing to Connor. He is visiting his son. He is channeling his pain into every plucked note. When he finished, there was a beat of silence before the applause. It was a respectful, stunned silence. The audience knew they had witnessed something holy. They knew they had seen a man bare his soul in a way that few artists ever do. The broadcast of that performance, and the subsequent album, became a phenomenon. But it wasn't the kind of Beatlemania hysteria. It was a quiet, emotional wave that swept the globe. Tears in Heaven went to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It won Song of the Year, Record of the Year, and Best Male Pop Vocal Performance at the Grammys. But the awards were irrelevant compared to the letters. Clapton began to receive thousands of letters, not from fans asking for autographs, but from parents. Parents who had lost children to cancer, to car accidents, to illness. They wrote to tell him that his song had saved them. They wrote that hearing a rock star, a tough guy, admit to such shattering vulnerability gave them permission to grieve. They told him that Tears in Heaven was the only thing that got them through the night. The song had ceased to be Eric Clapton's property. It had become a vessel for the collective grief of the world. It was a tool for survival. Tears in Heaven rippled outward, changing not just the public perception of Eric Clapton, but the man himself. Before the song, he was Slowhand, the guitar god, a figure of myth and excess. After, he was human. He was a father. He was a survivor. He became a symbol of resilience. The success of the Unplugged album, which sold 26 million copies and became the best-selling live album of all time, was a strange vindication. It was his biggest commercial triumph, born from his deepest personal loss. It was a paradox he wrestled with. He famously said in an interview, "I felt like I was profiting from my son's death." But he used that profit to build a monument. He didn't keep the money. He auctioned off dozens of his most prized guitars, including Blackie, the Stratocaster that had defined his career, raising millions of dollars. He used the money to found the Crossroads Center in Antigua, a rehabilitation facility for addiction. He turned the pain of his past into a place of healing for others. He built a literal sanctuary out of his grief. He ensured that his son's death would lead to other people saving their lives, and he continued to play the song. Night after night, in arenas around the world, he would sit on a stool and play those two harmonics. And every night, he would see people in the audience weeping. He became a conduit for their sorrow. He carried the weight of their grief along with his own. But healing is not a destination. It is a process, and part of that process is letting go. In 2004, 13 years after the tragedy, Eric Clapton made an announcement that shocked his fans. He was retiring Tears in Heaven from his live sets. He explained that he no longer felt the raw, bleeding grief that was necessary to perform it honestly. He said, "I didn't feel the loss anymore, which is so much a part of performing those songs. I really have to connect with the feelings that were there when I wrote them. They're kind of gone, and I really don't want them to come back, particularly. My life is different now." It was the healthiest decision he could have made. It was proof that the song had done its job. It had carried him through the fire. It had served as a bridge from the darkness back to the light. He had survived. He had found peace. He no longer needed to visit the ghost every night. He had found a way to keep Connor in his heart without keeping the wound open. When we listen to Tears in Heaven today, we are not just hearing a beautiful melody. We are hearing the sound of a man choosing life. We are hearing the sound of a man refusing to be destroyed by the worst thing that can happen to a human being. It is a reminder that even in the face of the most unimaginable tragedy, art can provide a path forward. It reminds us that vulnerability is not weakness, it is a superpower. By opening his heart and sharing his most private agony, Eric Clapton didn't just save himself. He gave a voice to millions of people suffering in silence. He showed us that it's okay to not be okay. Connor Clapton's life was tragically short, but his legacy is immense. He is the reason his father got sober. He is the reason the Crossroads Center exists. And he is the inspiration for a song that will be played as long as human beings know what it is to lose someone they love. The Ballad of the Broken Man has a hopeful ending. The man healed. The silence at Bray Studios was eventually filled with music again. And somewhere, beyond the door, there is peace, we're sure. These are the stories that remind us why music matters, not just as entertainment, but as survival. If you want to keep exploring the deep human stories behind the songs that changed the world, hit that subscribe button. We have so many more legends to uncover.